Welcome one, welcome all to another edition of the 706 podcast. I'm joined today by my three co-hosts. My name is Kirk, but you probably already recognize my beautiful dulcet tones. I'm joined by my three prolific co-hosts, Tony, Anthony, and Connor. Please say hi to the audience in that order.
Hello, everyone. This is Tony.
Anthony.
And I'm Connor. Good to be back, everybody.
Connor, thanks for joining us. We know you were on probation for a while. It kind of halted our recording schedule. Anyways, we'll press on.
Still am technically, Kirk.
Still
we'll
are.
get to that later.
Well, you can sort that out with your PO afterwards. But he's in the state he's supposed to be in. I promise. So today we are discussing a movie that when I pitched it, I kind of said, I remember saying it's almost reverted into or not reverted because it never was, but it's almost turned or morphed into this like forgotten gem, right? It's a movie you might have heard of called E.T. It was released 43 years ago, actually, 1982. Directed, produced by Steven Spielberg. Written by Melissa Matheson. And it's kind of this classic kids adventure movie. Some might typify it as a coming of age movie or just a fantastical film about a young child's interactions and kind of development of a relationship with an extraterrestrial who lands on our planet somewhere in California. This kid, Elliot, he lives in kind of everyday USA and probably 8-9 years old. It seems like a rather precocious kid and finds a little bit of a connection with, maybe an unexpected life form, right? Of course. And yeah, it's a very interesting movie. It's mostly told through the kind of the lens or the eyes of the protagonist, Elliot. And we begin to develop some affection for this little alien, this squat, kind of deformed reptilian creature who eventually learns how to say a couple few words and has a toolbox of, you might call, superpowers as well. He can, cause objects to levitate, and he can essentially fly. And so the whole movie is about him trying to return home to his home planet when he was actually inadvertently left here by his clan as they were on some sort of recon or scouting mission. So that's essentially the movie in a nutshell. It was, a sweeping success for Spielberg. It's actually one of his highest rated movies. I mean, it can't be, there's no movies that are rated higher than it because it's a 99 on Rotten Tomatoes, but I believe there are a few others that are at 99. Surprisingly, though, the user score is tells a different story. I think, hovering somewhere in the high 70s, low 80s. So that's quite a large gap, especially for, a Spielberg film, which typically critics and viewers align on, right? He's not a filmmaker who traditionally pushes the envelope, but he also does throw in some little flourishes for the cinephiles. So I'm curious to hear from my co-hosts just of as far as initial reactions go, and then I have three kind of distinct but overlapping topics to cover to kind of give us the backbone of this episode. But yeah, I'd love to hear from I think I'd love to hear from Connor first. And, please just, as you, kind of give us your cursory thoughts, please tell us if you've seen the movie before. I can't totally recall. And just, maybe what your initial reactions were if you saw it before, and then also what what this current viewing did to you or for you.
Thank you, Kirk. I mean, like so many of our like big movies, like kind of well known, generally critically acclaimed movies that we watch for the podcast, it was something that I've always been so aware of, and of course, I've like definitely seen clips of it. I probably had it on VHS. I probably did watch it with my family, but probably at such a young age that I wasn't like completely paying attention. So it's one of those things where like I feel like I've watched it, but I hadn't watched it, right? And like many kind of classics, so which is why it's a great for us to revisit them on this program. But watching it now, certainly I was like, there were things I'm like, okay, I didn't even know this was the general. I thought I kind of knew the plot, but what I didn't realize was the idea of ET dying. Essentially, that's obviously the most impactful kind of part of the movie. There's this descent into the dark, sort of a descent into darkness, the sort of second act nadir that then is saved kind of at the last minute. I'd kind of forgotten about that and quite how extremely sad it is. And I think a lot of people I was watching some like, first time watching reactions by various people who, had somehow never seen the movie. And, that was a very common thing of like, oh, it's so much more sad than I remembered and, or than I knew. So that was definitely something that stood out to me. The movie in general, like just a lot of movies from this time, it takes on like sort of just this weird, like mythical, almost like, sort of like mythical in the sense of like, it almost feels sort of like so standard, so like part of the air that we breathe that you kind of forget the like the choices that are made, what it looks like. And obviously seeing like sort of the image of like, of sort of the 80s suburbia, right? That's obviously very like quintessential. And I think people still kind of associate this movie with that, this idea of this American normality that then is kind of subverted by the entrance of the mysterious, right? And that's something that's very classic and thought to be very like very so part and parcel of this like 80s period of filmmaking. And that was very interesting to see. Of course, you see more when you watch it, how like there's more detail, there's more like distinct choices being made. There's more stylization than you kind of might have thought. Now watching it as an adult, you see how it's stylized. You see how there's all this dry ice fog and all of the nature scenes. You see how, you have this feeling that obviously it's like it's impossible for me to separate from my own sense of nostalgia of having seen probably ET scenes of it at least as a kid, but also like seeing movies like it. So there's somehow this 82, this early 80s time period in movie making, never mind like what it was actually like in real life. This somehow feels like kind of a vision, like the world of my childhood in a way. So like I can't really like discount that. Obviously, like that was kind of part of the intention behind Spielberg, that he wanted to create this kind of like almost this image of childhood that was kind of quintessentially American and stuff. I think there's something very interesting about that. But overall, let me just get to it. I found it a lot more emotionally impactful, though I have to say in recent years I've been very much like a softie. I get very easily get like emotional at movies that are even a little bit maudlin, a little bit sentimental. I can get very easily get emotional at sometimes even very odd things that I probably shouldn't get emotional at. But obviously, E.T., we understand that it is a very impactful, very emotional story of the innocence of these children and their love for this innocent creature, E.T., right? And that definitely struck me this time. However, getting to kind of the end of the movie, it's so bombastic, and this is something that I so have grown up with. The ET theme playing as they ride the bike, as they fly into the sky, the impactful moment of them saying goodbye to ET at the end. These are all moments that are kind of like they're sort of like shop worn. They're images that are recurrent to our mind. So I have to say that maybe it was a combination of it being a bit like overdone or sort of I overexposed to it over the course of my life, or because maybe my own aesthetic taste. I felt that like the movie is so it becomes so much of like it really believes in ET as a kind of Jesus-like figure is the only way I can put it, that it's so like biblical in its presentation of this alien and how he rises from the dead and how they say goodbye to him and how he hugs the children and everyone's crying. It is like so over the top that I did have a moment at the end of like, it loses me a little bit. I wasn't fully there, but I can also say, how is that possible to separate from like my own sense of like my own loss of innocence and my own cynicism about like, it's just very hard to separate. I feel like it's hard to get a totally like sort of objective view of this movie because it's just so like it's just been so present in my life and in like my visual imagination even that it's like it's hard to even like get a sense of what I'm really looking at, outside of my own like sort of opinions. But anyway, a very well done movie, and the emotional impact is like quite an achievement. Like it's hard, to do that. It's not easy to make that happen. And of course, the filmmaking is very on point, very flawless. But there is something a little bit that it takes itself just a little bit too not seriously per se, but just it's just a little bit over the top. I guess is all I would say. It's such that it lost me a little bit at the end, but I can't fault so many aspects of the movie. It's a very well done story for kids, and I think it's quite a good one in the canon of like blockbuster movies. But anyway.
Thanks, Connor. I'm curious, you talk about kind of trying to transpose your reactions now onto your own childhood, and I wonder what, you would have felt had you thrown this in the VCR in, I don't know, say like 1999 or 2001 or something. Do you feel like it would have been a pivotal moment, or it just would have kind of been one amongst many movies that, form that constellation of our kind of youthful awareness of culture?
Craig, it's a really good question. I had the thought, I'm not sure how true this is, but I had the thought as I was watching this that this is a movie that I enjoy more as an adult than I think I would have as a child. I think because it plays upon nostalgia, the innocence of children. I think as a kid, I may be lying about this, but I think as a kid, I would have been a little bit suspicious of that. Like, I would have been like, oh, this is kind of corny. Like, this is like, of course, the kid is innocent and totally trusts the alien. I could see myself as a kid being like, but why does he trust the alien? You don't know what that alien's going to do. But as an adult, you kind of think like, no, like of course he's a child and he's innocent, so of course he doesn't suspect the alien of any harm, and that's what makes the alien trust him in return. So like, I guess as a child, kind of paradoxically, I was a little bit more cynical. I think that I may have been as an adult, but that may have been my own childhood. I don't know, but I do think there's something about this movie that it really, because it's an adult's vision of childhood innocence and a version of his own childhood, I believe, from what I've read. I think there's a reason that it works that way, and I don't think that's like a problem with the movie. But I just think it like maybe it wouldn't have spoken to me as much as it does to me as an adult. But I don't know.
That's a great point. You wonder who ultimately this movie is for. It's for kids, obviously, first and foremost, ostensibly, but is it inextricably tied to an adult's understanding of childhood? Can it transcend that in any meaningful way? We'll continue to discuss. I want to hear from Anthony. Anthony, have you seen the movie? If so, kind of exploring the difference in the viewing experience between, the first time and now. Would love to hear it.
Yeah, I don't remember if I mentioned this last time when we were debating about it, or Tony was debating which movie to pick. The memory I have, and Connor's point is now making me wonder how much of it is just stuck because I decided to stick to that memory, or how much of it actually was how I felt in that moment. But what I remember is as a kid, about 5 or 6, the like VHS paper cover with the famous shot of the bike flying over the moon, or with the moon in the background. But I remember as a kid watching this and then thinking about like something like The Sound of Music as well, and that they were things that were supposedly like these great classics that like kids were meant to love, or meant for kids to love, and I've just never got into them at that age, and I didn't get back into it even now. And in fact, in some ways, I felt like I was watching this and almost upholding and defending my childhood distaste for it at times. It didn't really hit me in a way I hoped. I thought maybe now I'd be more willing to embrace or accept like the sensibility of earnestness that's just kind of like reeking over the film. I thought maybe I'd be nostalgic for this kind of like childhood it presents. And I just really wasn't. I found E.T. as annoying as I did as a kid watching this. Nothing about him, nothing about the animatronic puppetry spoke or hit me in any way. And I don't really fully know why. I don't really know if it's just that I just don't have that like soft spot for that type of storytelling or something. And I could agree it's well made, it's like well done, the things are fantastic about it. But on an emotional level, it's just such a like it's like there is no connection from the film to me. And but I did think about this because I remember when we talked about the Little Princess Kirk, you talked about how like one thing that doesn't seem to get made, or at least it didn't at that time, and maybe streaming or something has changed this, is how live action films for kids just aren't made the same way. But I kept thinking about the ones I did grow up with and the ones I did respond to, because I did really like A Little Princess at that time, and I still did when we watched it. I liked Hook at that time, another Spielberg film. I have not seen that in years. I don't know how it would hold up, but I remember really enjoying like the Robin Williams and the villainry of I think Dustin Hoffman who plays Captain Hook. And I remember enjoying even like things like The Secret Garden or something and so forth. And so I was kept thinking, I'm like, what is it? I don't know. Was I just a typical kid a typical boy, especially who wanted like a kind of like actiony element to it, who wanted that kind of evil and the alien because I was obsessed with Star Wars or something, who wanted a kind of more action-packed American, grandiose kind of story. And so I watched this and I was thinking, it's more so I feel like I'm faulting myself and my own taste for not responding to it. But I also at the same time kept wondering what it is I was missing. And I hate doing this, but I went and read like Ebert's like glowing, enthusiastic review from 10 years later. I read other people who were of that age group who would have watched it as kids grow up and love it. And I was even reading kids from today, like hearing what their parents had to say about their responses. Um, so this may just be an individual case, although I think Connor had a little bit more warm things that maybe are making me reconsider some stuff to talk about down the road. But at the moment, I can't quite say I fully understood it. I fully understood the emotional resonance people especially seem to have for it. But maybe you'll defrost this cold heart, Kirk, or something. So yeah, no, I'll be interested to hear what you and Tony have to say.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's an inverse correlation between authoritarian views and kind of espousing authoritarianism and appreciation for a film like E.T. So I don't know what that says about you, Anthony, but I fear for your soul. No, I appreciate that perspective. I honestly I can agree with it. I'm very torn on this film. To be honest, it's hard for me to know where I'm missing kind of the light bulb moment. And typically I can find that even, on an intellectual level, even if I can't emotionally grasp it. But, I'm still kind of mulling it over. It's been a while since I've seen it as well. At least 20 years, if not more. Tony, why don't you round us out? You're the one who graciously chose my nomination. What were your thoughts? When was the last time you saw it? Was this the first time, etc.?
I think I watched this movie like 4 or 5 years ago because I think that if anyone remembers the podcast, The Canon, which was kind of a loose inspiration for our format and premise, they did an episode on ET, and I always followed that podcast and I watched whatever they did. And I'd always assumed I'd seen it like as a kid, but that may have been my only time seeing it. And I kind of had a pretty muted reaction, kind of comparable to what Anthony said, where I didn't really emotionally respond to it. But it's interesting now because I feel like watching it now, I like definitely kind of engaged with it a little more, which is odd, like being older. But I think real quick before I forget, Connor's point about E.T. is this like biblical figure. The funniest shot in the movie, which I'm shocked no one mentioned yet, is when he's in the back of the van and the doors open. It's literally just Jesus emerging from the tomb. He's standing there in a white robe and his heart is glowing. Like it's literally like it looks like it's something out of like Scary Movie or something. Like it's that like on the nose of like it's an amazing shot. And then there's the people staring in awe, this the Spielberg face we always talk about. And the other thing I want to hit real quick is Anthony mentioned the movie Hook, which is an interesting counterpoint. I never watched this movie, but I know it by reputation the reputation being that it's widely considered by critics to be one of, if not Spielberg's very worst film, and yet it has a huge fan base. Like a ton of people like love Hook and have a ton of nostalgia for Hook. And if you go to Rotten Tomatoes, it's got a 29% critic score and a 76% popcorn score. That might be comparable to the popcorn score for E.T., but you notice a huge disparity in kind of the opposite direction. So that'd be a very interesting movie to, just for my own kind of curiosity to visit. But there were a lot of things in this movie that I like really appreciated, and I think that for about 75% of it, I was basically in the mindset of like, well, there's a lot of things to appreciate about the movie, but I wasn't hit emotionally in the way I was supposed to be. Like the opening sequence, like there's such an effortless kind of virtuosity to Spielberg. Like in the opening sequence, there's no dialogue, and he tells the story with images, and it's just perfectly paced and edited. And just those images of like you see the rabbit, you see E.T.'s hand, you don't see E.T. He's not kind of revealed until later. You just get these it almost feels like you can see the storyboards or you can see like a comic book. He just has these really strong evocative images, and like the whole movie is filled with just these iconic images that are just like, again, he just kind of, they're so casually just like thrown out there, like with almost like just effortlessly, and it's kind of amazing like the number of times I'm just like, wow, that's such a great shot, or it's a shot that I've like seen in my dreams, or it's a shot that I've known my whole life. And it's just this random moment in the movie, like the guys marching in the sunset, the silhouettes of the government officials. It's just like gorgeous. And there's so many just amazing, just little moments of lighting, like when Elliot's looking at ET under the glass and you see that nice soft light on the side of his face. It's just beautiful. And the close up of him and you see his reflection. There's just so many like great little moments like that. Like in every moment of the movie, like it's just filled with these like images. And this is like, I don't know what number this is in his filmography, but this is after Indiana Jones. This is after Jaws. So he's already established himself as a filmmaker. He's already very popular. He's already a big name. He's well into his like virtuosic sort of like mastery of cinema. He's already hit that stride kind of. And I think just, to me, like thematically, and also too, I got to mention the John Williams score, which John Williams is another artist like Spielberg who's just so effortlessly virtuosic. I think his best scores will always be Star Wars, the original Star Wars. But okay, Kirk's shaking his head. Oh, we can have that debate in the bonus bit maybe.
Indiana Jones.
Indiana, I mean, he's great. I mean, they're all great. I mean, but like this movie, it's so good, and I think that sense of like emotional childhood nostalgia or whatever. I think John Williams carries a lot of that. I think a lot of that comes from the music that he's putting on top of these images. I even remember as like a little kid in like music class, they were trying to teach kind of an object lesson in like the power of music in cinema. They show the final scene of E.T. where he's getting on the spaceship with and without the score. And without the score, it's hilarious. It's just the most awkward, slow. He's kind of waddling. It's really funny. So if you can find that clip without music, I highly recommend watching it. So it definitely works. And that's not to insult Spielberg, because obviously he's collaborating with John Williams. Obviously he knows the music is going to be in there. He's deciding how to utilize it, whatever. But I think that plays a huge role. And I think that really sells a lot of these moments. And to me, like this movie, and I think what Spielberg does very well, like as an artist, and a big through line in its filmography, is that feeling of like remembering what it's like to be a kid, really being in tune with kind of his inner child. And to me, this movie is, the sadness comes not from E.T.'s death, which is my least favorite trope, the fake character death. I never like it in any context. But just sort of like the whole idea of like the loss of innocence, and like that I think is hanging over the whole movie. And like you keep seeing these cuts, you get the contrast between them hanging out with ET and like the wonder, he's making things float, they're hearing him talk, just this incredible just awe and wonder of childhood. And then you see these forces coming, these like government officials that are extremely nebulous, as a child will understand them to be. They're never given an agency name. The cars they drive literally just say United States government on them. So and you see these men with like, guns and like devices, and they're faceless. There's just this faceless kind of horde of like enemies that are approaching. And to me, this is like the approach of adulthood. And this is underlined in the plot by the backstory that the parents have separated, which is sort of a loss of innocence moment for these children. And I think it's important too that there are three children rather, representing different stages in development. You have the Drew Barrymore, who's like, I don't know, 5, then Elliot, who's like 10, and then the older brother who's a teenager, and they all want to, and the teenager might kind of give his brother shit and bully him or whatever in kind of a typical older brother way. But you see how quick he is when he meets ET to like go along with it, to go along with it. He's desperate for that same, to return to that childhood innocence, to return to that world of fantasy. And I think this movie is about there being kind of a magical world that children have access to that the outside world does not. And you see the kids and the adults kind of set it in conflict throughout the movie, like when they're letting the frogs go in the classroom, which in real life, obviously, like that's that kid should be disciplined. You should go to jail. Obviously. But in the world of the movie and in that world of childhood, he's doing like the pure kind of morally correct thing. Two moments that really hit for me when the movie kind of hit home emotionally. Again, not ET's death, but the scene shortly before that where one of the scientists is talking to Elliot, like, and he's the first one who actually tries to actually talk to him and relate to him. And he's saying, like, I've wanted this ever since I was 10 years old. And he's like connecting it to his childhood. It almost feels like Spielberg himself putting himself into the movie. And he's saying, like, him being here is a miracle and I don't want him to die. And it's like something about that, like, touched me because it was the first time a grown up really was trying to relate to Elliot and trying to speak to him. And it felt very much like that was him, like, he needed that father figure in his life. And in that moment, he kind of got that. That did make me like choke up a little bit. There was something just the way he speaks to him. He's so soft. He's so understanding. And in that moment, we can kind of feel how Elliot feels. We kind of understand his stress and his anxiety and his pain. And then two, I think that the final like escape sequence where they're running away on the bikes, I think is just an amazing like sequence. It just is a piece of like action filmmaking that's repulsive, it's exciting, it's well paced, it's well edited. But that moment where they're approaching a man with a gun, you see him cock the shotgun, and Elliot just closes his eyes, and you see the bikes lift up. I think there's such a power in that image, just the closing the eyes and just kind of that childhood belief, just that like surrender, that I think is something very powerful and universal that I think Spielberg was able to kind of tap into in that moment. I think as far as the things that keep me distant from it, I don't like how the alien looks. I think it's an ugly creature design. It's definitely very unique. I'll give him that. It's kind of a one of a kind, iconic look, but he's not like a handsome, like cute creature. He's not Stitch from Lilo and Stitch. I mean, come on, like I don't know. That's one thing that I think kind of holds people at a distance from this movie. But I don't know. Anyway, those are my rambling thoughts on the movie. So in general, I'd say I quite liked it by the end, kind of more than I was thinking that I would.
Thanks very much, Tony. Very considerate analysis. I think for me as well, the overall look of ET, it's just hard to kind of wrap your metaphorical arms around him to really appreciate him as something that's super lovable and kind of cute and charming. He's grotesque, and you wonder how his race has survived. They seem so ill and malformed, and I don't know. It's quite strange to understand. Maybe they're like the rejects that they send to other planets as kind of test monkeys. I don't know what's going on with ET, but he doesn't necessarily evoke the images you might have of a typical higher intelligence or a supreme being from another universe, right? Like when Joe was leading Heaven's Gates, he wasn't planning on drinking that potion and going to meet ET per se. He was going to meet some other form of consciousness. So I don't know. I think to me, I think there could have been a restyling of that to make it more accessible for children, like Gremlins or something. Like Gremlins are cute and they're bastards, but they're also, I think the cuteness is like the overriding factor. So they're not ever too threatening. Well, maybe you disagree, but one thing that struck me when you were talking about the loss of innocence, like if we were to continue the reel and watch the rest of Elliot's life, I mean, he would be irrevocably destroyed from here on out. Like, you would never be able to recover from this encounter. He would probably fall into a deep depression. His development would be stunted, and he'd probably end up dying, or by some form or fashion, prematurely. I think it's quite interesting how we kind of collectively disregard the ramifications of these types of events, because it's an episodic thing that we're meant to understand is not something that would happen, or something that could happen per se. I mean, there's obviously this suspension of disbelief, but I think this movie, I never really found a true connection to it. I almost had a certain level of disdain for it. I think where that came from is when I saw it initially, which I was probably like 7 or 8 or 6 even, I was quite unnerved by the second half of it. I thought just kind of the sterilized, authorities were a little menacing. I, kind of feared for the boy's health. ET goes into VTAC or VFib. I think he's in, his heart is basically failing him. And it felt like it was too much for me at the time. I don't know how old I was. It didn't feel like it was playing by the rules that I had subscribed to vis-a-vis childhood films, Home Alone, The Goonies, etc. Even Indiana Jones to me feels less kind of creepy and disorienting than this film, at least the second half. And, on this watch, I feel as though a lot of my original thoughts are, justified to an extent. I think it's an incredibly well-made film, and there's this distinction between the craft and its effect on the viewer. And I think that is what explains the difference, the disparity between the user score or the viewer score and the critic score. Ultimately, are you looking to come to this movie to see something that's well made, or are you looking to come to this movie to experience something that will move you? And I don't know, Tony, it sounds like you were moved at certain moments. I didn't feel that personally, but again, it's hard to like disentangle yourself from the years of, analogs that we've been exposed to. Stranger Things came to mind so often. The guy even looks like Matthew Modine, the key jangling guy. And there was some tonal dissonance there. I didn't really understand. He seemed so menacing at the beginning. And there's this like apprehension to show the faces or like the upper torsos of adults, except for the mom, throughout the whole movie. And then they just kind of let go of that. I didn't really understand what that was about. I guess it's just meant to like kind of further transport us into the psyche of Elliot. It's just an interesting film, rife with nostalgia. There's his brothers smoking at the kitchen table while they're playing Dungeons and Dragons. His brother's in high school, definitely not 18. It's a little funny, to be honest. I think there's a lot to kind of, it was a different time. There's a lot to see and to really appreciate. 43 years ago. So let's go back 43 years from when this movie was created. That's 1939. That's Wizard of Oz. Like, that's a long period of time. And in some ways it doesn't feel that detached, in others it does. One thing I just feel like I have to mention, I'm kind of like the geography guy or correspondent here. I find it funny how so many movies set in like the 80s and 90s use California, right, as their backdrop for suburbia, when California has the most distinct geography in the country, like in the continental US, but they want it to feel like everyday suburbia. There's huge mountains in the background. There's these grand ferns and evergreens, and it's it's very hard to connect with that for me, and I find it amusing. I'm sure Anthony, a native Californian, has a different perspective, but that was just one thing I feel like I had to know. So moving forward, what do we want to talk about? I think we can talk about Spielberg and his canon. We can talk about this movie's place in kind of the cultural scaffolding of the 80s, and then we can also talk about the film's place in the overall cinematic arc of popular mainstream cinema and blockbusters, because this is obviously would be classified as such, as something that's crafted for and consumed by the mainstream, by parents and children across the country and across the world. So I guess I'm curious if we want to look a little bit, kind of unearth those nuggets of nostalgia. And I'll turn this to you, Connor. And what does that do for the viewer? Does that ultimately, is this movie, I guess, is it aging in a way that is kind of antithetical to the viewer's desire to connect with the subject matter? Or does it add almost like a bonus level of amusement? All the native advertising as well. This movie, I feel like that wasn't as prevalent in the 70s, but I get, Reynolds Wrap, Reese's, Coors, Coke. There's so many, instances of native advertising in this movie that it feels like it's very much a product of its time. We kind of largely think of the 80s as this period of rampant consumerism. So, Connor, just, on the nostalgia bit, what do you think it does? How does it augment or detract from the experience of a viewer of, this piece of work, this piece of art?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it can only be a bonus, but that's also me because I just have a fascination with the past in general, and that always adds an extra layer to analyze. But I think one just observation I'd make is that this is sort of the childhood of the people who kind of created our childhood in a way. The people who were making stuff, that we were watching in the early 2000s, grew up with ET, and so it's a curious reflection that's their vision of childhood. It itself, like so many things in the 80s, is kind of a person who grew up in the 50s idea of childhood. So there's all these weird reverberations of childhoods and images of the American childhood, of Americana, of pure suburban existence. To defend the depiction of California, Kirk, I think I agree. I think having gone just having gone out west and seeing how different the geography is, it's actually quite jarring when you're actually there. It feels almost like a different country completely, though we're so inundated with these images of California because of Hollywood, right? That it somehow doesn't, on a screen, it doesn't feel that way. And, to me, the way that forest is depicted and the way you look out over the city and see the lights, see the town, the small town that's ringed in by mountains. There's something very almost mythical fairy tale about it that obviously is an accident of, partially an accident of kind of classic Hollywood filmmaking, but also, yeah, Spielberg knows what he's doing and showing this kind of little town that's nestled in these mountains and with this dry scrubland around it and stuff. And I think there's something, it's still kind of smart and iconic about that. But I would say that for me, it kind of helps. When the kid is smoking at the table, while playing Dungeons and Dragons, I'm all there for it. It's very cool to me. There's a vision of a vanished past. There's saying penis breath. Everyone loves the penis breath line. It's very weird to think about. Why would he say that? What was the kid thinking? What kind of messages is Elliot getting, calling his brother penis breath? It hints at a kind of darker, situation and darker set of values that he's imbibing. But there's something kind of interesting about that. I think some people I think there's a debate, I've seen, just reading a little bit of Wikipedia. Kirk, you're right. The friend tries to touch the mom's ass. That's true. So it's dark in a way. I was reading Wikipedia, a review of people say this is an idealized vision of suburban, American childhood, but actually it's not. It's this crazy world where kids are running around unsupervised without a dad and blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of weird because it's is that a dystopian vision? Because we kind of long for that, and the kind of culture is sort of nostalgic for that as well, and riding around on your bikes. And I'm thinking of that new Star Wars show I just saw the trailer of, where it's again trying to call back to these 80s childhood movies and riding your bike around the suburban neighborhood. And it's just kind of like, it's thought to be kind of a distant past that somehow we grew up with, but is now gone. Those kind of mythic images are all interesting. I'm not sure the movie Spielberg was like intending to do anything like that, but that's obviously still kind of in play. But I'm not sure whether I conclude that this is a dark vision of his world, because to me, I come back to the moment that we can kind of laugh at when Elliot wants to show ET like his world, and he's like, okay, here's a fish, and here's the shark, and he goes through all of the characters from Star Wars, and here's Greedo, here's Lando Calrissian, here's and that's very interesting. I think that, like, to me, that I found that actually kind of touching. You could kind of see that as a cynical sort of like, presaging of how all of our kind of pop culture is created by a few companies and whatnot, and a few properties and stuff. But I also found it kind of touching that for an American boy, that's what he wants to show this alien, because this is his world and this is his culture that he wants to share with the alien. So I don't know. I found it kind of charming. I guess I can't come down on on like a completely for or against kind of narrative here, but obviously at least I can say that it's interesting. It makes the movie interesting to watch. But I have to say that it's somehow a little bit extraneous to the point of the movie, although being the case that I don't know. I've read a little bit about how this is sort of a thought to be a Spielberg's kind of narrative about himself as a child, about his own experience of having a divorced mother, divorced parents, his own experience of having an imaginary child. So obviously he's trying to conjure up an image of childhood, and he's creating a new image of childhood for the 80s that then becomes an image of childhood in American suburbia that we kind of inherit as well. There's something interesting about that, but I'm not sure I have a great point about that. I just think that the movie is kind of almost worth watching for that reason. I think there's something is kind of like important about it, but I'm not going to like go out on a limb to make that point. But I don't know what you guys think about
it. Any retorts, any thoughts just on this subject, Tony or Anthony? What does this kind of cultural patina, what role does it play? This movie is thoroughly oxidized one way or another, right? It's not its original color, but is that ultimately a good thing? It's obviously inevitable, right? I can't really think of a movie that doesn't follow this kind of life cycle, this path. But what are the implications, and what are the kind of the predominant emotions that are evoked by by a viewer some 43 years later, peering into perhaps someone else's, like Connor is noting, someone else's understanding of nostalgia that's like, it's doubly refracted in a sense. Is it disorienting? Is it actually elucidating? What do you find?
You reminded me of a couple things before I get to that part. And to Connor's point about the setting, the location. On a personal level, as someone who grew up in Rancho, or in, I guess, the part of the Inland Empire, and I'm so used to the kind of mountain landscapes around you, there's a sense of watching this where I could imagine my own kind of upbringing in a different, or in a slightly more idealized version, a slightly more remote, less connected internet-wise sort of landscape. It also had me thinking about how many other movies about children were just borrowed or relied upon the San Fernando Valley to like shoot their films, or to be the kind of basis of what the ideal suburb or what every American suburb would look like. And it brought me to another one, which was a big movie for me as a boy. I don't know if it was for you guys, but The Sandlot. Remember The Sandlot? That was another film that took place in the 1960s, but in the San Fernando Valley. And that one offered a kind of very utopian vision of the neighborhood and so forth. So anyway, I bring that all up to say, because I was thinking about this point about Connor was making about how the people who invented our childhood were kind of watching ET at a certain stage or at an influential stage. And it had me thinking about I wonder or I wonder if some part of the disconnect from this movie for me is simply the lack of danger feeling in the actual boys going out, in actually exploring this world. Yeah, we have this moment where the government people come in and stuff, but I never get the actual sense of danger of what I would expect children to feel like in their world around them. And I keep thinking of another movie like Stand By Me, which may be geared towards adults, but deals with that kind of idea of being a kid afraid of the larger world around you, I think in a much more interesting, true to suburban living feel than what goes on here, which is so sensitized of any kind of violence or any kind of like hurt possible in the world around them, that I don't feel I feel like I'm being told this was what the world was like before it went to like hell. I feel like I'm being told that like this was the ideal way like kids used to be when they could be latchkey kids, Gen X style. That this is something that the millennials and like Zers don't have. And it something about that just leaves the overall thing feeling a little bit more disingenuous than it could have been. And this reminds me then of maybe why so many people respond to Hook. Tony, to go back to your point, I think a huge part of that is, without explaining too much, is of course about Robin Williams, who has become the sort of father figure to so many viewers, or a kind of like kooky uncle figure. You can't really criticize him in any way. He's just so beloved. And I think that's a huge part of that. But I think the other side of that is the Peter Pan story, and the going back to it has a kind of sense of danger to it. It's everything that you come up in a fantasy as a kid about the way the world would want to get you if you could live out the adventures you want, if you could live out the adventures that you're coming up with. And where E.T. then kind of folds back on it is it seems to want to only highlight the kind of emotional and sentimental aspects of befriending an outsider, with only having this kind of governmental intervention come in to try to dispel it. So I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking on the spot. I don't know if any of that made sense, Kirk, but
Oh,
it's just kind of things I was jumbling through my mind as you guys were talking.
it definitely did. And this movie feels like overly Disney-fied, which is interesting because at the time we're looking at very much a rivalry, an incipient rivalry between Disney and Universal, and their respective creative minds that are kind of spearheading this. We have, I can't remember what year Universal Studios opened, but Steven Spielberg was brought on as like a creative consultant for Universal, to kind of, in Orlando, to combat the dominating forces of Disney in the amusement industry. But, a corollary of that is also in the movie industry. And this very much feels like a response to some ethos of Disney. And as a result, it does feel like overly sentimental, but not necessarily in a genuine way. What's interesting is I do remember riding the ET ride at Universal Studios in Orlando. It was such a cool ride because they took your names down before you got on the ride. They asked you your name and you didn't really understand what that was for. And then after you go on like the flying bike, which is like kind of the climax of the ride, when you're getting off, E.T. says, "Goodbye, Kirk. Goodbye, Karen. Goodbye, Riley." And it's fucking mind-blowing. Like, it's so cool. No ride has ever done that, as far as I know. And I'm pretty tuned into the amusement industry. So it's just an extra flourish. It shows really how hard Universal was working at the time to be a player on the stage. And it's funny that those battles are still playing out. Universal's Epic Universe is opening in Orlando this year. It's a huge Magic Kingdom style multi-world amusement park that they can't build on site. They built it closer to the MCO, the airport, but they're actually threatening Disney now. So I'm getting on a tangent, but I think it's funny to see the interplay between the amusement side of things, right? We had Jaws at Universal Studios. We had Back to the Future at Universal Studios, the rides. And then, Disney with its own canon. But Tony, you were going to say something, and I didn't mean to sidetrack us.
Yeah, it's where they got your name. They asked for my name, a DNA sample, and my social security card, which I never got back. So I should probably look into that. But if anyone has not seen the Eagle Heart episode Tramps, which I just realized references the ET ride, please watch that as soon as possible if it's on streaming anywhere, which it might not be, which makes me very sad. But to circle back a little bit when we talk about this world of the latchkey kids world where kids can go out and be on bikes and we're not worried about them and everything. The thing that undercuts that a little bit is the mom and her reaction when Elliot does not come back that night. The police are there. She's a nervous wreck. She's crying. And then when he emerges, she's like, never do that again. Are you okay? Whatever, how you'd expect a parent to react when their child's been missing, which kind of is interesting because it's like, what is the role of the mother, whose name I forget, the mother character in this film, because she seems to be sort of I think she's important. She feels important to me, and that she kind of keeps the story kind of grounded and gives us a little bit of distance from that pure living in the pure world of childhood and wonder. As Kirk mentioned, kind of, or at least early in the film, we don't really see the faces of any adult character. The mom is the major exception. The mom is a major character who's a constant presence in the story. At the very least, she's a source of, dramatic tension. They're trying to hide ET from the mom, and the mom is not a menacing figure. She's a pretty, she's a mom. They love the mom, and she's a source of stability and comfort for the kids. But also, they have to be kind of secretive, and it feels like that's, I think, the way a lot of young children conceive of their mothers. But I'm just curious to what you guys made of the mother and what her role in the story is. I do love too the moment where the penis breath moment we alluded to, and one of my favorite little moments in the movie is she's kind of chiding Elliot, but she can't help but laugh, which feels very like relatable. I feel like that's how I would react if I were in her shoes. But and then she's the one also who kind of reminds us of the kind of the more serious things going on in terms of the separation and in terms of kind of so I don't know. So what did you guys make of her character, and how do you think she kind of flavors this world or contextualizes it?
Kind of feels though like at times she's like the idea of what a mother is supposed to be of like this hardworking like single woman. Because on the flip side of that, I was thinking, Tony, is like the kid gets into all this trouble or potentially trouble only through the actual alien, particularly like the drinking scene, right? It's like the moment where how do I describe it? It's the sense of like the actual dangers that the mother would be worried about are able to be experienced by the kid without him actually having to suffer or worry about it. The day-to-day stuff, the actual things that teenagers and kids could get up to, things that parents would really be afraid about, the drinking, the alcohol, and so forth. So I don't really know what to fully make of the mother as a type of grounding. Although you are right, where she does worry about him as kind of a flip to the kind of idea that they could just roam freely, I suppose. So I don't know, just a thought, but
Well, she's also, to your point, she's kind of like oblivious. And I say this
yeah,
not to like insult her, but there's times when like she very much does, in kind of an unconvincing way, does not really pick up on what's going on. Like most notably when they go out for Halloween and ET is in the ghost outfit and literally talks, and she's like, "Haha, you're so silly, Drew Barrymore. You go have fun," which I think does still keep us in that kind of kid mindset of like, oh, I could fool my mom. She would never. So anyway, I just thought it was an interesting kind of counterpoint. But yeah, I agree. I'm not quite sure how it fits in with everything else, but she does feel a little bit idealized, I suppose.
yeah. It's not like quite like the Charlie Brown like parents where it's just like squawk, but there is kind of a sense where it's like generic talk almost coming out. Maybe.
See, I think
Well,
she's the once I just briefly, Connor, I think she's actually she's depicted as a mom who's barely holding on to me. And I think that's reinforcing the importance of a father figure and the absence thereof in this film. And I think it's ultimately a tiny bit misogynistic as it plays out, because she seems a little, easily duped. Like she's a mom who's, overly hung up on her husband, and that whole Halloween scene, which I didn't really understand what the fuck was going on there, where she's like dressed up and at home and extinguishing the candles, and she says something about Larry, which is her husband, I'm assuming, who's in Mexico with Shirley or Shelly. I don't know what's going on there. Connor, go ahead.
Well, let me explain my headcanon, Kirk, about who the dad is dating now and what they're doing in Mexico. No, I mean, I think I was about to say what you said, Kirk, that there's a hint of misogyny here that I've heard also. It's kind of in synopses of the movie that like she's an absent mom, absent father and absent mom, and E.T. wants to go home, and Elliot wants to go home too. He doesn't have a home, which is very hard on the mother who is seems to be doing her best, and any mother who is looking after her kids, doing everything she can. It's not really fair to say that she's not providing a home for her kids. I think it is a bit misogynistic on the part of maybe some observers of the movie and maybe of the movie itself, in the sense that she's like a little bit oblivious. But I think that also happens for plot reasons. At the end of the day, she does come to though she's a bit worried about ET. She's kind of like she is scared for her children at first, but she comes around and really comes to appreciate and love ET in the same way that Elliot does, which shows that she's a good mother. She's connected to her children. I think the moment when the older brother, this to me was like really hit me kind of hard, was this moment of the older brother sort of scolding the younger brother for making a fuss about, if dad were here, he wouldn't treat me this way. He would believe me. And of course, that's an idealized kind of reflex of a kid. But it's very hard for a mother to hear. It's very painful. And, the older brother scolds him, like, how can you say that? Like, don't you ever think about anyone else's feelings? And that's a good question. That basically, like, does he really learn his lesson? First of all, we can't completely blame Elliot. He's a kid. He makes a mistake. But does he also learn a lesson from that? Does he learn to really connect to his mother? I'm not sure we get like a great moment like that where he kind of comes around to help his mother to the extent that he can. Of course, he's a kid. He doesn't have to help his mother in the same way, but at least to be there for his mom and recognize, that she's there for him. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I do think the movie has an interest in this because I think probably Spielberg himself, has guilt about, how he treated his mother, guilt about how he felt about his mother being divorced and all this. And, so I think there's a hint of, on the movie's part, there's a hint, I think, of compassion and love for this woman. But I think the way people have read the movie and the movie itself, the text of the movie itself lends to a kind of, maybe, as you said, kind of very kind of mom bashing kind of reading that you mentioned, Kirk. But I would say what was funny is just before I was about to watch this movie, I told I'm with my mom now. I'm staying with my mom, and I was about to go watch the movie. So I'm going to watch ET, and she's like, "Okay, we're going to do the podcast." Well, don't be too hard on ET, okay? Like, don't be mean to ET. And I was like, oh, like, why, mom? And she's like, well, it's like a nice movie, and like, like, it's a good movie, and like, ET is a nice alien, he's a cute alien. And I'm like, okay, mom, I won't. I was kind of touched by that, but my mom obviously probably has self-associated it with, I mean, I wasn't born at the time the movie came out, but clearly she had some connection to the movie, and she really like, I think the childhood innocence, the idea of taking care of these kids, and the expression of this childhood innocence somehow spoke to her. And so she had like an image of this movie, and though she was an adult, she was probably my age when this movie came out. So what I guess I'm trying to say is that character maybe gives us maybe it gives us a perspective, counterpoint to the children that then heightens sort of the innocence of the children in a way. But anyway, I'm kind of throwing darts at the wall there, but
No, I mean, it's an interesting point. Tony, did you have a thought? We're gonna move to final thoughts here.
Not a substantive thought. I want the spin-off / sequel, FU, about the dad's adventures in Mexico. Someone needs to make this movie. So Spielberg, I know you're a fan. I know you listen. Just see what you can do. See what you can do for us.
Okay. So thank you everybody for your thoughtful discussion. I think we do have, we could talk about this for a little bit longer, to be honest. But one thing I just want to hear your thoughts. Maybe if you want to touch on like the Spielberg essence. We didn't really touch on Spielberg himself. Tony did a little bit. I appreciate that, Tony. But for me, this is like there are directors who try to infuse ambiguity in their films, right? Like a Kubrick, like a Hanukkah. Who else? I don't know, like a Fellini or Campos or there's a variety of filmmakers that are kind of like that, and then there are filmmakers who it seems like they try to present a monolithic, a unified approach to their films. It's a universality. It's a 360-degree portal of accessibility, right? And I think that this is one of those instances where there is kind of a very limited spectrum of how you can read this film. There's not a lot of divergent moments where people are just going to have just totally different opinions. The beats largely probably play out similar for each other. And I'm curious what your thoughts are just in general on, you don't have to necessarily comment on that concept or that framework, but just on Spielberg and his approach and whether or not that's something ultimately that you resonate with, or whether you appreciate movies that are a little less accessible, and whether or not that matters. And then ultimately, giving your vote for this. I know that's a little bit of a task, what I just threw down to you, but I'd love to hear some thoughts on that as we give your vote. Connor, go ahead.
So for Spielberg, I don't really have a relationship to him in the same way. I have not watched those movies. I have not gone back and watched a lot of the Indiana Jones movies. And why? Kirk, I think, is trying to imply something as if I don't like movies that are accessible, like I'm some kind of obscurantist or elitist or snob, which is the most absurd thing I've ever heard in my life. But might there be something to the fact that I don't intentionally seek out these kind of classic movies because I feel like somehow I've already seen them, or what do I have to learn from them? I guess that's the thing. I'm intrigued, right, by things that I have to figure out, or there's a difference of opinion, there's a critical controversy over what the movie means, and so that's the kind of thing that ever since I was basically a teenager is when I started actively seeking out movies. The movies I seek out are movies that I think will give me that. I will have a sort of a mental, intellectual thing to play around with, in addition to having an aesthetic experience as well. But I generally do resist the idea of wanting to watch a movie just because I want to feel something. Let me put on this movie. I think I honestly, I'm starting to understand that a bit more as I age. But honestly, it's not the way that I've ever approached movies. And so, if a movie comes out and it's in theaters, I'll go see it. Of course, if everyone else is seeing it, I'll watch it. I don't have any issue with that. But the way I've experienced movies so much is seeking them out intentionally on the internet or on streaming, right? I have a different relationship to movies. So I can't really speak for Spielberg, but I think I appreciate that this movie has, as Spielberg is a thoughtful director. I don't want to say that he's it's a rube or kind of like a crude or simplistic, sort of aesthetic and intellectual creation that he's done here. And I think there are kind of emotional depths to even a simple story that like this one. And though there are lots of things that I think we've hit upon that are kind of missteps, I do think maybe having ET die is a bit of a trope, and it's a bit it's a bit over the top the way it ends. But I think there's an emotional depth to this movie that we're just only beginning to kind of scratch the surface of. I know that it's not I'm not saying it's deep, but there's more to what we could say about the movie in terms of how it inspires these emotions, how it conjures these emotions, and what Spielberg himself, I think, was trying to get at. I think of seeing that character, from the waist down or from the chest down, not seeing his face, this authority figure, the guy with the keys, sometimes just called keys, his jangling keys. We have no idea what that means, but there's something kind of weirdly almost sort of avant-garde about that image of this guy with just keys, and that identifies who he is without seeing his face. We don't see his face until he introduces himself and tries to connect to Elliot. And I think as Tony was elaborating on that moment a bit, and I really like that moment as well. So I think there's a lot of smart and interesting and kind of thoughtful touches here that are still there. And though maybe the plot is a little bit not the most fascinating, I'm still going to give it a yes. I think it's a very very interesting movie, and I think I'm glad that I've revisited it, even though I probably may have never actually watched it from front to back before.
Thank you, Connor. We appreciate yeses around here. We love adding to our canon. Let's see what Anthony has to say. Anthony, go ahead, and
Sure.
Feel free to expound upon the topics laid out.
Yeah, well, I'll start by quoting the mother Sablasik and say it's a nice film or it's a nice movie. And I'm going to take that and just extrapolate it to the rest of the films of his I have seen because kind of like what Connor is saying, I guess I don't also have a relationship, but my general feeling about him, honestly, is that he's like an elevated Ron Howard at times, or that like he makes like really good versions of like fairly basic movies, which it has a time and place. And for that reason, I'm thinking of like Saving Private Ryan, which is like a solid war film, but I don't think it like is elevated to like the top of that canon of like war genre pictures for me personally. I think where he really shined is in the first and third Indiana Jones movie, Raiders of Lost Ark, and then the third one, the Last Crusade with Sean Connery. I also think the original Jurassic Park and Jaws are really the kind of exemplars of his kind of magic. So in some way, I feel that when he works in genre, he seems to get a kind of response, even if I don't have that response towards like E.T., but he seems to really hit something. I don't think he's done it in quite a while. I was not a fan of Ready Player One. I know Tony tried to convince me otherwise. I was not a fan of The Post. Did he do The Post? I think he did The Post in 2017. So there's a expectation about him. You know, he's the name, I suppose, that's synonymous with the kind of general public of great filmmaking. But in a kind of irony, it's his fun summer pictures that are really the kind of real magic, and the real kind of pieces of substance, if that makes sense. So with all that being said, I got to go with my initial reaction still, Kirk. I was not convinced fully enough, I think. Although I like hearing what people talk about. I'll just say one last thing is I was curious if did anyone have in their whatever they watched when they're running just before they fly, did the guards have walkie-talkies or guns?
They
Did
had
you guys
gun-
notice?
there's the
They had
famous
guns?
issue of that they changed that for a subsequent cut. That
Oh,
they
did they?
digitally altered the guns to walkie talkies. It's a famous thing that, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, I
because I
was
saw
reading through
shotguns.
shotguns. Yeah, okay, I did too. But I was reading through a list about how in the mid 2000s, the like Star Wars or something, it was just famously a number of scenes were edited. But that's the big change. Anyway, I'm just curious. But yeah, no, I got to go. No, Kirk. Sorry.
Right. Like the who shot first? Is that the,
E.T.
Yeah.
shot first in
Greedo?
the
Yeah,
original
E.T.
cut. Sure.
It was actually E.T. in the bar on I forget, Mos Eisley. Okay, interesting. Tony, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention Schindler's List. So I want you to I'm tasking you with mentioning Schindler's List and
Nice.
deciding which one is more thematically and historically important. This or E.T. or Schindler's List, and which one ultimately speaks more about us as a human race.
Thank you, Kirk. That's a great. Thank you for teeing me up like that. Yeah, he's like Spielberg's one of those guys where it's like if you're a I went to film school. I never bring this up, but I did go to film school. So in film school, you notice this in particular, but I think among people who are just into film in general, you notice this as well. There's sort of this thing of like there's this kind of reflexive, like anti-Spielberg sentiment. And then as kind of you get older or you're kind of your betters, your more learned professors will be like, ah, you naive young child, you will but learn to. But I think there is a truth to that, and that like as you kind of mature, you're able more to appreciate him a little more just on a pure like craft level. Because I think to Connor's point, if you're someone who's kind of self-consciously into film, you are naturally going to want to seek out the more provocative, the more obscure, the more aesthetically bold and colorful. I mean, I'm certainly like that. That's not to say that that's like the end all be all or whatever, but that's the art that really excites me. That's the stuff I kind of seek out. And Spielberg is sort of like feels very vanilla in comparison and very kind of sentimental, which especially when you're a young person and your tastes are kind of being formed and you're starting to experiment more with what you're into like aesthetically, that's kind of anathema. That's kind of like the last thing you want to like get into. But I think if Spielberg were of an earlier generation, if he were like a Billy Wilder type figure, and he were making these movies back in the 40s or 50s, we might feel more drawn to him. I think that there is an element of filmmaking that is just pure craft. And if you're watching it with that mindset and you're watching it just purely from the technical craft perspective and just the pure, like the basics, the building blocks of filmmaking, I mean, he's about as good as you're going to find. And I think that that is something that is inherently that merits praise, you know. But I can say just aesthetically and subjectively, you know, Spielberg's never going to be my favorite guy. You know, he's never going to be my guy. He's never going to be Martin Scorsese to me, right? He's never going to reach that level just in terms of my enjoyment. But especially as I get older and watch more films, I can turn on E.T. or Raiders of the Lost Ark or whatever and be like, holy shit, like this guy, like the editing, the sound, the score, I mean, that's John Williams, but you know what I mean? John Williams kind of carrying him. But no, but just like the basics of cinematography, the basic building blocks, the basic elements of film are always like top notch. And I think too, on the note of the sentimentality, which is gonna, you know, alienate some people, I think part of what makes it, what sells it more with a movie like E.T. is the feeling of sincerity. I never get a sense watching this that the movie is like insincere or cynical in any way. I feel like he is genuinely exploring his own childhood. He's genuinely exploring those themes of loss of innocence and being a kid. And that feels very genuinely felt to me, which I think is what makes it, what kind of sells it. And yeah, and I mean Schindler's List is amazing. It's an undeniable film. You know, if you watch, if you haven't seen, I'm not gonna be like, you got to watch Schindler's List, but if you haven't seen Schindler's List and you're watching it for the first time, I mean, it's hard not to feel like really just swept up and overwhelmed by just the power of that movie. I think too, like, you know, the fact that he didn't want to make it right away. He waited years until he felt he had reached a level of his filmmaking prowess that he felt he could do the subject matter justice. And I think that speaks to just his sincerity and the seriousness with which he takes his craft and the themes he tries to put forward. So even if he's not my favorite guy, I have a lot of respect for Steven Spielberg. I am going to give this movie a yes, which I didn't know that I would maybe at the start of this discussion, but I think there were a lot of good points made, and I was surprised by how much the movie kind of struck me on this go around. So I'm going to say yes.
Excellent. Okay. So ET is in. I just want to mention one more thing, a full circle moment. The first episode we ever did was Spice World. In Spice World, there's a small scene where they meet a group of extraterrestrials, and it evokes you know, kind of the first scene of ET. They these little squat creatures hop off the and slimy and kind of grotesque, and they're like fondling Baby Spice and Posh Spice. But I just, you know, its influence is it can't necessarily be encapsulated. But anyways, glad to hear that we, you know, got some good discussion in, and that we have another movie in our canon. Let's now move on to the final part of this episode, where we're going to decide well, I'm going to decide what we watch next. And so we're gonna have my three co-hosts nominate a film each. The decade rule, the Kirk provision of 1983 still applies. You know, until the Department of Government Efficiency overrides it. Basically, at this point, you know, you're not allowed to double up on decades. So whoever goes first has somewhat of an advantage because they have all of movie history to select from. So who was the least recent host? It's either Anthony or Connor, and I think it might be okay, Anthony.
All right.
So you're riding a little bit of a cold streak, Anthony. We need you to come back strong. We're all really, really hoping you nominate Amelia Perez. No, let's well, tell us the order. You get to decide if you want to go last. Maybe that's an advantage. You can, you know, kind of scope out the field. What do you want to do?
I think, you know, okay, so I'll go second. I feel like that's always a safe bet. Hopefully, it doesn't, you know, torment me in the end, but I'll have Tony go first, Connor last.
All right, Tony, what do you have?
I did this to me. I wasn't super prepared, but I'm just gonna throw one out. It's been on my mind. I watched Anora a week or two ago. Very good, and definitely what's his name? Sean Baker. Sean Baker has emerged as one of our kind of leading kind of contemporary filmmakers. He's really getting his flowers these days. I think it will be fun to go back and watch one of his, and one that speaks to me in particular is from 2021. So I'm taking the 2020s, and I believe Connor has seen this. I don't know who else has seen it, but this is Red Rocket. And this is basically a movie about a retired porn star who is left the biz and he's going back to his hometown to try to kind of reestablish his roots and just carve out a life for himself. It's very funny. It's very, it has some, anti-hero dark shenanigans, but it's a really like entertaining, really well done film. And he has other great movies. I love the Florida Project as well. But for whatever reason, in this moment, Red Rocket is the one that is speaking to me.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds intriguing. I've not seen it. Okay, Anthony, you are next, and the 2020s are off limits. So
Yeah, well, we only watch movies that are 2012 and afterwards, so it should be it should be pretty easy for us. So if Tony did the 2020s, I'm gonna go the 20 teens to 2014 to be exact. My thinking about this is I feel like Boogie Nights would be automatic. There Will Be Blood might be automatic too. The one though that is I think the most interesting for us, that's we probably have a kind of split response to, is Inherent Vice, starring Joaquin Phoenix as Doc Holliday. Doc, who has to go searching for a woman who went missing after trying to get him on a case to begin with. It's the one I remember, Tony. I don't remember if we saw this together. I remember you being very kind of back and forth on it. And I remember if Connor's seen it. And I would assume maybe you've seen it, Kirk, but I'm not sure. But it's just kind of one of these interesting pieces in his overall kind of filmography, kind of like maybe Punch Drunk Love or something. It has its cult audience, it has its cultists who argue for it being one of his best. But there's something that also seems to resist a lot of people, or a lot of people become kind of hesitant about it. So I think I'm ready to go back to Inherent Vice. I have not seen it since then. I have not seen it since then. I've gotten way older, way wiser. I'm going back to the book as well. So I think the time is right. Inherent Vice, a kind of neo noir of our kind of more contemporary moment, even though it's set in the 70s. So that's my choice. Connor's laughing. Curious what he has to throw out too.
well, Connor, just thank you, Anthony. Connor, we'll get to the rebuttals. So sit, keep your powder dry. But what do you have for a nomination, Connor?
Okay, this is, maybe an unconventional choice based on the cast, but I would like to nominate 2002's True Confessions, starring Shia LaBeouf, a very young Shia LaBeouf. This is a movie that I have not revisited in a long time, but I have a very distinct memory of it being the very first movie I ever watched that made me cry. It made me cry very like uncontrollably. So I was thinking about just my emotional reaction to ET. I want to get to the bottom of like how do I have an emotional response? What is it for? and you guys are looking up. Are you okay? Well, it's not too. Actually, I think it's a normal runtime of a movie, but it concerns Shia LaBeouf plays the. Sorry, it's about two couples. Trudy is a sister, and she has a younger brother. It's played by Shia LaBeouf with some developmental disabilities. And it's a movie that just left a very deep impression on me. And yes, it would be our first Disney Channel original movie for the podcast. It's about time.
Okay, I was struggling with the IMDb because I only saw the 81 or 82 Duvall and De Niro. I don't. Is it even on IMDb?
It's spelled TRU Confessions. I just did the same thing. I'm like, what the hell is this movie?
Okay.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay, some rebuttals. Tony, go ahead. What? True Confessions, the original Disney Channel classic, and Inherent Vice. So basically two movies on even playing field. Pick your poison.
This is a tough one. I think Inherent Vice is a very good pitch for the podcast. It's an interesting one. That's the movie I've watched. I think that's a movie I've seen the most times to try and get myself to like it, because I've been very patiently explained over and over how it's actually a masterpiece, and it's never really done it for me. It could just be a matter of it being just not for me. I don't know. But it makes me sad because I put in the chat, it came out 10 years ago, which blows my mind. It does not feel like that long ago. The last PTA movie I really loved was The Master, which makes me kind of sad. But who the hell cares? I'll watch it again. I'll watch it a fifth time. Maybe I'll see what's so great about it. I don't know. And then maybe I'll read the book. I don't know. Maybe that would do it. I don't know. as you all know, you should have to read the book to enjoy a film. And then True Confessions. I like the Connors pitching a Disney Channel original movie. It's definitely an area we have not explored. So I'm down for that. So I'm down for any of these. I guess Red Rocket, it's a movie that I think we'll have things to say about it. I think it's an entertaining movie. It's definitely got like substance. There's definitely things to like discuss about it. It's got a lot of great texture, which I always love from a filmmaker. I think Sean Baker's great at giving his worlds like this amazing sense of texture and this great like immediacy. I think it's something we would all kind of connect with and enjoy. It's a really just entertaining, well acted, well written kind of character portrait. It depicts a really interesting, vivid world. And I also just think like he is like one of those like we talk about who are the like the next generation of like the big boys or the big who are the next generation of like great filmmakers that are really like kind of on the up and up or that will be talked about later. I think Sean Baker is on that list, and I think it would be good to watch one of his movies that's maybe not like the most praised necessarily. I mean, it was well reviewed, but I don't think it's a movie that like gets as much love as like The Florida Project. Certainly not, his latest Anora. So I just think it would be good to do, but I can't knock the other two.
All right, thank you, Tony. Some things to consider here as I'm mulling it over. Anthony, go ahead.
Yeah, I like the boldness of Connor's nomination. I got to say, I do remember this movie, not in any detail, but I remember sitting there watching it in the like 2001, 2002, whenever it came out, and my cousin crying during the movie. And I also remember the movie that followed it was a forgotten classic called Alley Cat's Strike, about two misfits who find their love for bowling. So I'm gonna say that they're kind of like as a wave of interesting like Disney movies around this time. Halloween Town 2, I gotta throw out there as well. So maybe there's something there Connor sees in this that's worth worth going back to hunting something closer to our own childhoods, maybe than E.T. or maybe than some of these other films that we've done. But let's see, Tony's film is interesting. I can't say I've quite gotten into it. This filmmaker, I haven't seen that movie. At times, I feel that Simon Baker's just merely like Safdie brothers without any of the charm or fun edge. So maybe this would be the one that unlocks Tony's fascination for it, and a lot of people's fascination for his stuff. So I think there's something there. When's the last time you saw Inherent Vice, Tony?
Inherent Vice, probably 5 or 6 years ago.
Wow. Okay, so it's been some gap of time. Maybe we don't want to submit Tony through another experience, but maybe this would be the one that finally wakes it up. Armin White always says you need to watch a movie 6 times to finally begin to understand it. So I do think there is something to Inherent Vice that maybe is just not for him, but maybe the rest of us would gravitate towards. I don't know if you've seen it, Kirk, but I do think there's something interesting about it, and I do think it's probably the last time PTA's really interested me. So we'll go that way.
Is it like, thank you for your case. Is it like Licorice Pizza, a movie where if you didn't buy weed behind the Megaplex in Long Beach in 1993, you wouldn't understand it? Like, I fucking hate that. Oh, it is. Okay. That's kind of it's kind of a mark against it, Anthony. But what? It's almost like a rage bait here because I hate movies that you can't dig into. That you can't even access, but you think you can. You think it is accessible.
I think there's more accessibility than maybe Tony suggested in that brief comment. But, I think there's something interesting. It's a dissection of California, too, which is after E.T. maybe necessary.
We don't spend enough time in California, honestly. We don't see enough movies based there. I wish they'd give it some more screen time. But I do love myself some California, and I love to see the various locales and ET I think was like Northern California. It felt like Citrus Valley or Citrus Heights or whatever in Sacramento area. It didn't really feel like the Valley, but what do I know? Connor, go ahead. You have a monumental task ahead of you.
Just to rebut the others movies. So Tony's Red Rocket I have seen. Very interesting movie. I had sort of a slightly lukewarm reaction to it, but it's kind of grown in my memory as a great movie that I would like to return to. I think I might say that I even like it better than Anora. That's my hot take, though. I think it does very interesting things, that movie. I haven't seen all of his movies, and I haven't seen the Florida Project, which I think is considered kind of maybe the most canonical so far of all of his movies. But I think it would be worthy to discuss Sean Baker's Oeuvre, and in particular, Red Rocket is an interesting one. As for Inherent Vice, it's tough because it's like I hate to say this, but it's like, of all the PTA movies that we absolutely must watch, it's going to put a freeze on our PTA suggestions, and it's a movie that I think we're just going to have problems. There's just going to be a lot of head scratching. There's going to be a lot of going back and forth. Oh, it could mean this, could mean that. I will say that I have read the book, okay, which is more than I can say for the book that True Confessions is based on. But I will say that True Confessions is, I thought of it because I'm blanking on other movies. I'm thinking of my cool, wacky picks. I'm thinking of my hyper intellectual, my cool old hidden gems I found, or all kinds of weird societal narratives I can make about them. But watching this movie, E.T., it begged the question: okay, what's a movie that I have a reaction to? What's a movie that makes me feel something? And especially as a kid, maybe like I wouldn't have had an emotional reaction from E.T. as a kid, but if movies are made for kids, and if I know for a fact that that's a movie that touched me in a very deep way, that really made me feel something, that I still remember it to this day, and I still kind of revisit it in my mind. I don't remember the movie. I know the movie, like I'm familiar with it. I've rewatched it, not super long ago, but I just want to, I think it's a very interesting, very different kind of pick, very different, sort of path for us to go down for an episode of the podcast where we can talk about, the sort of emotional impact of a movie made for kids, and why and how, and talk about our own relationship to, sentiment and emotion. And of course, I could have gone for the meme pick. I could have gone for Xenon, the sequel. I could have gone for Halloween Town High. I could have gone for, Sky High. I could have gone for Johnny Tsunami, of course. But, I want to give you something that actually, means something to me personally, and not just in a meme sense.
To me, it's very much a meme pick, but I guess you have an emotional resonance with it. So it's a matter of trust. It's a matter of buying in. I think for our next episode, Red Rocket, I think that'll be probably the best choice for my viewing pleasure, but also we'll get to talk about a director that we haven't discussed. So, that's always exciting, a little bonus as well. Tony, congratulations. What do you have to say for yourself?
I don't know. I'm excited. I'm excited that two of you have not seen it. So I think it'll be a fun discussion. I think it's a very fun, very touchable movie. So we'll see how it goes. Maybe you like it, maybe you won't. But I think at the very least will be an entertaining watch and entertaining discussion. So should be good.
All right, Tony. We got to work on your promos here. We got to get you, watch some WWE content. You got to tomorrow night, Madison Square Garden. No, but yes, please join us next time. We love you all. Stay safe, stay healthy. Anthony, take us away.
I'll have what she's having.